Hello, class. I thought that I should make this brief video so that I could address the usual things that all of you have seem to have trouble with, or at least the vast majority of you, when it comes to writing. So I wrote notes in all of your papers. Please do download the Word paper that I uploaded on Moodle. On your grade, you should see the upload of your paper with my grades. So please do that. If you have any issues or problems in doing that, please let me know. You will see there that there's a number of notes and indications and comments outside of the very generic comment that I post on the Moodle page when I just post the grade. Okay, so you have a more detailed analysis of your paper. Now, after you do that, um, you will see that there's a number of issues that for the vast majority of you I have listed, which are primarily syntactical problems, grammar, the usual grammar issues. But there are a number of things that I would like to outline here, uh, especially because now we're getting ready to get in the second part of the course where you will start working on your final paper. And so a paper is something different from um, the impressions and the notations and the things that I've been asking of you up until now. Of course, this is a 300 course, so you're all familiar with what it means to write a paper. But I wanted just to give you a little bit of um, information and help. Always remember that the Writing Center here at the JCU is still functioning and open. You can make appointments, and a bunch of us will are available to talk about your papers, your issues, suggestions in any form. So, at any stage of the preparation of your paper or whatever it is that you're writing, you can contact the Writing Center. And even for a brainstorming session, it's really, I think, worthwhile. So, first off, please let me reiterate that it's really important that you put your last name on the name of the paper that you are uploading on Moodle, because just EN360 or paper for class is not enough. It creates a problem for me when I am cataloging them and when I'm answering to you. In general, try to think um, of the person that is receiving your file. So, and this goes also to when you are going to ask for a fellowship or send a letter for a job. Whatever you're doing, always try to sit in the place of someone who's receiving your documents, your files, your email. So make it easier for them. Right? In this case, just write your last name. Okay. Um, Now, more in general, let's see, we are talking about gender issues, and it's a very charged issue, as you very well know and live on your own skin. But I would urge you, now that we're moving on to the final paper stage, um, to consider both sides. Men have been pretty much as women chastised for their behavior when their behavior did not conform or does not up until today um, conform to what we have established I'm sorry, we have established to be um, heteronormative kind of um, value. So uh, don't just write as if you were defending um, women. We are here writing papers and trying to analyze things from as much as, sorry, not coronavirus, I assure you. Um, we're trying to analyze things um, from a literary, artistic, and critical point of view. So it is paramount that you take all points of view into consideration. And this leads to my second point. If you don't do so, you will end up writing a manifesto, which is wonderful, interesting, and an important thing to do for many reasons that I wouldn't go into right now. Nonetheless, when you are writing a paper, you're now writing a manifesto. The difference being that a manifesto is primarily directed towards those that already think alike, that already share your point of view, and then you're inflaming and you are communicating an urgent need. Okay, and if it's not directed toward those that think like you're just communicating the urgency of something. When you're writing a paper, when you're writing an essay, anything that goes into the scientific community, you're trying to convince and establish um, ground points for those who do not think like you. So this is really crucial because right now, in a paper, much like in an essay, in a book, you are trying to get as many people as possible to really come to your side. So if you're using a manifesto mentality and rhetoric, you would alienate people that do not think like you because they would think that you are addressing only like minded people. So in a paper, don't do that. Um, now, another important issue here uh, to be taken into consideration for any paper that you're writing is that you can be general, but you shouldn't be generic. To be generic, it means to just channel through a paper what everybody knows, what many said, a lot of people think. All of these things are good and well if you are talking to someone, if you are conveying your thoughts in an informal way. But when you're writing a paper, you have to think that people should take time out of their lives to read what you're writing. They don't know you, they don't care about you. So, why would they read uh, words that go into general or generic knowledge? So, you can approach things from a general point of view, but being generic is always a mistake because nobody cares about generic kind of assessments. Everybody shares them. So, why mention them? Um, I will go into a little bit of details about this point. Um, Now, let me get more into some specific advice. And these, again, these are things that all of you, these are mistakes that all of you make, and it's understandable. I'm trying to help you to write more successful papers. So every time you feel the urge or the need to write, as I mentioned before, or as I said, that's always a problem. So, why would you say as I already mentioned, or as I said, in a paper where people can go back and retrace what you said. There is a double problem here. First of all, you give the reader the impression that you're insecure. And so you're trying to fix things that you maybe did not fix before. And therefore, you give the reader a sense that you're not really coherent in your writing. The second problem is that um, it may, this assertion, as I mentioned before, as I said before, it makes the reader think that you do not really have a grasp of an overall structure of your paper. So these two things, being insecure and not having a grasp of whatever you're writing, are very negative because a paper is a way to convey a point that is a personal point, that is something that is important to you to communicate to the world. So you don't want to make people uh, perceive you as weak in your thought. So don't do that. Every time you want to do that, go back and think, oh, okay, so I didn't exhaust my point before. Exhausted before, and so you don't need to say, as I mentioned, and add things. So again, in general, the difference between a manifesto and a paper need to be very clear, and they go into the register um, with which you're writing. So the register is the rhetorical overall mode in which you communicate things. So in a journalistic kind of setting, you can be more informal. You can use short sentences. For example, everybody thought that this would have been a crisis. Period. It was not. Period. It's a very dramatic way to convey things, which go a little bit towards creative writings, but it sounds very journalistic. It's sensational and it's okay in a newspaper article. Now, again, while you're writing a paper or an essay, you try to communicate a more complex, structured, intellectual point of view. So try to get away from to step away from these rhetorical modes um, that would make the reader feel as if you're trying to convince them of something you do not really have proof of. Um, so, let's get a little bit now into something that's kind of fun, I guess. So you might have noticed that when I composed the text for the midterm, I switched um, from using Monique Wittig's whole name to referring to her in a more colloquial Monique. Uh, to some of you, I, in your papers, I have corrected and I try to note that you should always use the author's last name. So when you're writing a paper on Great Expectations, you wouldn't say, well, here Charles tries to underline a major point in children's growth. So that's Charles Dickens. You would always say Dickens. But when it comes to women, we tend to use the first names. And again, I did the same thing. So we all, even as women, need to keep us in check because when we're quoting other women, we inherit this um, kind of more male mentality where women are less authoritative, and so we can address them by their first name. So always keep yourself in check and double check, which I didn't do. I'm sorry, when I was writing the text for the midterm. Uh, so a few very, very specific advice, which go to basically all of you. do not be too colloquial. Keep your colloquialisms in check. Like, this is based off of. And that's colloquial. This is based on. The use of due to, which is very popular among students. I don't know why. That must come from some internet kind of colloquialism. It's very specific to law language, to bureaucratic language. So this is not due to. You can use because of, depending on, dependent from. So use many other ways, uh, more literary, more interesting ways to say that something is dependent on something else. Um, Now, attributive tags are an issue for the vast majority of you, but in general. So, attributive tags need to be addressed head on. And please go on Moodle and see on our Moodle page that I put some resources since the beginning of the course, one of which is called attributive tags, how to say what you want to say. So please refer to that. Okay. Now, the question of the manifesto, and which is different from an essay, I understand it has uh, been kind of problematic here in the specific context we're working on, because Monique Wittig is writing a manifesto, right? And for all intents and purposes, that's a manifesto. She's very strong. She's very axiomatic. She says truths that cannot be um, really argued with. Okay, so some of you also noticed that she was writing these two essays in a moment when a revolution really was needed. I mean, it was a very different times from the one we're living on, and so there is an amount of aggressive language and of a manifesto language that goes into the time in which these things were written. So I can understand how this could have been confusing in writing your response. So I did not take away points or penalize you in any way for this. I'm just trying to outline as clearly as I can that moving forward and starting to work towards um, the final paper, try to be more detached, more objective, more scientific. Again, the reason being that you're more convincing and you want to be convincing. You want to do so that your point of view, your idea, your new take on things is read, understood, quoted, and overall becoming more important than other points of view. Okay, so my last thing would be, and this is again a notation that comes from the majority of you, a problem with the majority of you, when you're describing a plot or a character, always use the present tense. It's got the historical present. So you're getting into a story which is outside of the general history we're living on. And therefore, um, it's always forever in the present. So, for any questions, for any issues, please write to me, contact me. And for now, that's all for me. Bye.